Hello, everybody. Welcome to our session on Strange Company. My name is Sam. I'm a product marketing manager here for Strange Company at Boutinot. And on the other screen, we've got Robin Naylor, who you've seen probably too much already today. He's also the product manager for Strange Company in Wilderberg and our resident South African know-it-all. Robin, do you want to introduce yourself in any other way?
I think you've just done it, Sam. Thank you. But yes, product manager responsible for Boutinot in South Africa, for Wilderberg and Strange Company. And today we're going to be talking about Strange Company specifically, why it is and what it does.
So can you start, Robin, by giving us a really sort of simple terms overview of what is Strange Company? If somebody's watching, oh, hang on a sec, we've forgotten an important part. We were told this only 10 seconds ago. Please, if you're wherever you're joining from, let us know in the comments where you're calling in from, and also ask your questions in the chat. We'll try, if we remember, to answer them as we go along. But if we forget, we'll do them at the end, and hopefully we'll cover as many as we can. Back to the conversation, Robin. Please, can you give us a really simple overview of what Strange Company is, where it is, how it relates to Boutinot and Boutinot South Africa, and the other things we've got going on there.
So Boutinot has been working in South Africa for about 27 years, and in that time, we have worked with lots of amazing old vineyards and fairly classical kind of cultivars, varieties, classical wines, and all the way along that process, we have discovered as a company various varieties that happen to be there as well that either get overlooked or passed by or whatever. And I think that personally, over the last sort of 17 years of working for Boutinot, I've seen a lot of interesting varieties sort of on that journey. And I think that we have a responsibility to sort of talk about those things in South Africa as well, especially these days in terms of more and more discussions about sustainability, old vines, representing what belongs, planting what belongs rather than just what sells. We have a fantastic platform with Boutinot in South Africa to be able to talk about the things that we produce in slightly larger volumes, like a Sauvignon or a Merlot or a particular kind of Chenin or whatever it might be. But I think that has also created for us a fantastic platform to be able to talk about some of the more unusual varieties in South Africa, or other ways of making wine, or things that are perhaps a bit less loved. Some of the older vineyards, for example, get dug up all the time as we speak. It might be that vineyards being dug up in South Africa, and I think as part of our process and our relationship with South Africa, we have a responsibility to talk about what belongs in South Africa in terms of what grows there for the future of sustainable growing in South Africa, as well as what else is there, just the sort of rainbow nation of varieties in South Africa. It's interesting to talk about things that are also there. So Strange Company is really a voice for some of the more unloved cultivars in South Africa, a kind of cultivar club for the underdog, I think is what we call it as well. It's just an opportunity to talk about different varieties from South Africa that grow there. Often an old vine is an unworthy thing, but where an old vine is a valid thing that makes a wine of character from potentially an unfashionable grape variety, we want to be able to talk about those things. And certainly, Sam, have some fun in the process.
Yes, we try to anyway. You've said quite a lot there, Robin, so we'll try and unpack it one by one and dig a little deeper on each of those. But before we do, could you just say a little bit about how about Strange Company and Wilderberg and how the two sort of sit side by side or on opposite sides of the same coin, as it were, without muddying the waters too much?
Yes, of course. Wilderberg is a very, speaking slightly subjectively, is a very beautiful thing. It's sort of a very classically presented range of wines from that's entirely driven by specific vineyards that it feels it must represent. And those vineyards are probably of cultivars that are slightly better understood, from which we can make a more kind of classical representation. Chenin Blanc, Sauvignon, or a specific valley like Franschhoek, for example. And it has a very clear mission in terms of the wines that it wants to make. I think Strange Kompanjie is the sort of the things that Wilderberg might dream up in its sleep. It's a sort of slightly darker imaginings and the more experimental side of Wilderberg when no one's looking, if you like. So, and I think that it's really important that as we identify vineyards to represent with Wilderberg, as we've gone along with that. And Wilderberg is a representation really also of Boutinot's 27-year history in South Africa in terms of, we talked about Paarl Heights this morning as a Chenin Blanc and how Wilderberg Terroir Chenin kind of bookends that process of Paarl Chenin today. At the same time, what do we do with that awesome block of Palomino that we've worked with for years? What do we do with, you know, why is nobody putting that Fenao Perez into bottle? I think those things are exciting. They definitely deserve a voice. I think we have an opportunity to do that, but I think they need to be told in a voice and in a platform, and therefore a label that is slightly differentiated from that more classical production. But in terms of old vine projects, vineyards, old vines, natural ferments, our philosophies are very much aligned. I just think that the things that Strange Kompanjie is kind of allowed to do visually, and in terms of the varieties that it works with are less obvious, and as we'll probably say later on in the Sam, that people don't need them. We think they need them, but you don't absolutely. Your business is not reliant on Palomino and Fenao Perez from South Africa. But whilst we find these things, we want to talk about them. So the great difference between Wilderberg and Strange Kompanjie is kind of in the two names, in that sense that Strange Kompanjie is the sort of the imaginings that Wilderberg might not necessarily put under its own name.
Excellent. So let's focus obviously on Strange Kompanjie. That is, of course, what the point of this next half an hour is, rather than Wilderberg. I think you'll talk about that maybe tomorrow. But as you said, Robin, and I know you're keen to stress almost any opportunity to tell people that people really don't need these wines, that there is no reason for almost anybody to need Fenao Perez from South Africa in their life, though it might be a joyous thing to add it into your life if you've not already done so, but they don't need it. So in that sense, why does Strange Kompanjie exist? You mentioned before about vineyards being dug up, maybe as we speak. First of all, what are they being dug up for? Why? What do you mean by that, if people aren't aware of what that is?
So South Africa is in its 362nd vintage, I think, in 2021. First vintage was 1659, and we still regard it as a new world country, as I said today, and numerously, we think of South Africa as a new world country. And the interesting thing about South Africa is it's never been at a more interesting point in its life of having this fantastic classical production and insanely good value, by the way, still wines. But it can draw on this incredible history of old vines, and it's learning more and more and more about its special places of interest, about its individual regional flavors in a way that has never been more relevant before. And there's a fantastic thing now called the Old Vine Project, which identifies every vineyard in South Africa over 35 years old. And the great thing about a lot of those cultivars that are part of that program is people don't want them. They don't want them on their list. They don't know that they don't know that they exist. They don't know that they're a thing, and yet we have this opportunity to talk about these fantastic things. So, we'll talk about Palomino, Sam, and Fenao Perez. The Fenao Perez that we produce as Strange Brew Fenao Perez. I've spoken to many Portuguese customers and wine producers, and you'd be amazed how few of them are actually aware of Fenao Perez in itself. from their own country, let alone from South Africa. So a lot of South Africa's plantings historically are based on neutral grape varieties of high yield or neutrality, planted exactly for those purposes to produce as brandy or fortified wine or whatever it might be. When those vineyards then get forgotten about by a grower, they will naturally, slowly, usually invisibly, have some character develop to them that when you then turn your attention back to them for, say, a Chenin Blanc planted in 1962 or a Fernand Perez planted 34 years ago, I can't do that year in my head, sorry, or whatever it might be, they have a character, and it's that character that we're trying to capture. Its purpose is really to say there are other things here as well that are worth capturing, because vineyards are being dug up and grubbed up in South Africa all the time, because farmers will naturally want to make a return from their land, and where old vines might not yield, that they might grub them up and they might plant something else like blueberries or, God forbid, a golf course, but that's happening. So, before golf courses take over some of these vineyards, we'd like to express some of these vineyards.
Yeah, I think we've said before, Robin, when we've been talking to people about Strange Kompanjie, that you've just given a wonderful overview of sort of the history of winemaking. People think of it as South Africa is a new world region, but the history of winemaking in South Africa is incredibly old, hundreds of years old, and it's got a really rich winemaking heritage. And the fact that some of these wonderful things are being dug up in favor of the ninth green or a beautiful fairway or whatever it is, that if you do what we do, that should make you either really sad or really angry, and or both in some way. And so therefore, even though the things we're making aren't in huge volumes, and we'll talk about how much volume, because there's a question come from London about volume. What a brilliant segue that would be. And but the things we make aren't in huge volumes, but they are sort of emotionally relevant, as well as being sort of winemaking relevant.
And I think emotions are really important here, because I remember banging on about Cinsault from South Africa 12 years ago, how it needs to be a thing, and how trying to extract colour and flavour from the skins of Cinsault was a kind of a lost cause, and that really, if you just allowed it to be natural and to be kind of pale and interesting and make this nice textural, sort of earthy, slightly paler red wine, which is what Cinsault should do, certainly tends to do from the Mediterranean, you'd have a really interesting thing. And we made a success of that by being able to talk about its points of difference. There is an emotional attachment to a lot of these vineyards, and then taking customers, I think 6 years ago, to a particular, getting all excited about going to see this grower in Paarl with his 50-year-old bush vine Cinsault in Paarl, only to watch him attaching chains to the vineyards and pulling them out, which that wasn't planned. It wouldn't want to take somebody to go and see that, and there was a huge kind of learning for everybody there that it was an emotional thing to watch, but at the same time, this is what's really happening in South Africa. That vineyard that we've got some quite sort of interesting photography of that particular vineyard, and the one that you have here, Sam, on the screen is a similar age. These have just been grubbed up all the time, and I think that giving these things a voice, because inevitably these vineyards will still be lost. They increasingly have a value by us talking about them, by being able to bottle the expressions of those places, by being able to market them. And God bless our customers for buying these wines from us and then selling them with a similar story. They are supporting these vineyards before they get dug up. But I'm afraid that a lot of these vineyards, that will continue to be the case. So before that happens, our mission needs to be necessarily unlimited whilst we can talk about these other varieties in South Africa before we lose them. So
the question from London that I referenced before, how many bottles do Strange Kompanjie produce? I guess that means, across the range. We're talking small, we've been talking about small volumes of things, but how small are we talking?
So Fernand Perez 2019, this is the 2020, sorry, the 2020, appalled to say we made just 784 bottles of that. And the Palomino here, This is the 2020, where we were brave and we made 3 pallets of this. So that's about 1,800 bottles, possibly as high as 2,000, but the previous vintage was just 780 bottles. I think this is an opportunity just to say that the purpose of Strange Kompanjie is not to generate volume just in and of itself, but as well to talk about these individual vineyards. So if the planet decides that they don't like our expression of Palomino, and that's an uninteresting vineyard, and somebody else does a better job with it, that's fine. As long as somebody is saying something about these vineyards before they're lost, and we're by no means alone in this. There's a rich contemporary culture of young winemakers and old vineyards in South Africa, which is what makes South Africa today such a kind of a sexy area for wine. It's an incredibly exciting contemporary area to work with. This movement of energetic young winemakers and old vines, and we're lucky enough to play with these as well.
To touch on that, if you'll allow me, Robin, in our notes that we've got here, that there's a section that says about Strange Kompanjie being relevant to what's happening in South Africa right now. And I remember a year ago, maybe longer than that now, you sent me down to London to the New Age South Africa tasting for the first time, and I know you've been a couple of times before. And that's not to say we weren't there, but who was there was this spectrum of exactly who you said, young sort of energetic winemakers from South Africa, and you feel the energy in the room that sort of surrounds that movement, I guess. And albeit we weren't there, but some of the things that we are doing with Strange Kompanjie are relevant to that energy and that sort of enthusiasm. People queuing out of the door to get in, and there was a waiting list to get in through the door, simply just to taste. And then take last year's Tim Atkin report that I know we've talked about before with our own sales teams. And you read those first few pages, and the things that he mentions, are all very relevant to what we're doing with Strange Kompanjie, albeit in small volumes. Like, as you say, that's not why we've done them, but it's just a happy coincidence that there is a sort of trend towards this in South Africa. Yeah,
I think my bosses who will be listening to this thinking, this project has to make money. That's not its purpose at all. There are other things that will survive and prevail. I think what's most important is that Strange Kompanjie is purely a voice for those other wines. There's other varietals, there's other vineyards, there's other ways of making wine that are out there. And I'm aware that particularly with something like the amazing new wave movement they have from South Africa, that you and I are two blokes who are in the north of England currently talking about South Africa, and there isn't a South African voice here, Sam. But I think that's like the objective view that we have of South Africa to see what's so exciting about it, and Boutinot's inherent responsibility to South Africa as a wine producing country and a cornerstone of what we do at Boutinot. We have this opportunity to talk about these other varieties, about old vines, as well as our, dare I say, more day-to-day South African business, where we are, presenting hopefully incredibly valid, incredibly well-made, incredibly good value wines. We have this other opportunity, and we've created a platform to talk about these other wines from South Africa. That's incredibly exciting for hopefully any human in the wine industry to be able to talk about that as well. It's quite a personal journey for some of us, and I think we're allowed to have a lot of fun with the labels because these cultivars are less well known. But I think it's nice to read something like Tim Atkin writing about South Africa at the moment. He's talking about dry grain vineyards, the sustainability of working with what's already planted rather than grubbing something up to plant something else, and the energy involved in that. And I think with Wilderberg and Strange Kompanjie, a lot of what Tim is saying reads like a CV of what Wilderberg and Strange Kompanjie are up to. That doesn't drive what we do or why we do it. And as a lot of the projects we've worked with alternative grape varieties have failed, or we haven't repeated them because they've proved sort of too unsuccessful. But I think that in having a go, at the very least, in having a go with alternative grape varieties from South Africa, and giving them a voice. That's the principal objective of Strange Kompanjie, is to give a voice to these unusual cultivars, and it's profound, the actual commercial benefit that they then have for the vineyards on a bigger, slightly more anonymous scale that we'll come on to. But it is a slightly sort of personal project. But in South Africa in the last 15 months, I think anybody that's been involved in years is moved by this sort of find in South Africa. You know, it's really exciting to stand in Pekingese Kloof surrounded by these stumpy, dwarfish, gnarly Pekingese Kloof Palomino vines that have been ignored for 40 years, and suddenly finds an expression. That's a hugely exciting thing to then taste the saline quality of that wine, or to be able to build a blend around a particular region like we do with tea leaf to create a wine like that. It's very exciting.
So let's move on, if we can, to well, let's find a relevant slide. You'll have to forgive our amateurish operation of these slides. We'll use Strange Brew Fernão Perez, as you referenced it before. Let's talk just about the visuals. You'll have noticed again through our presentation, the few slides we've managed to show you so far, that the visuals are unusual. You know, it's not the normal way one would photograph the winemakers. The labels themselves are strange.
Some of them are rubbish. Some of them are really
some of them are not great. Particularly this one you don't like.
Particularly, it's really bad.
But let's talk about the visual. Why, you know, they're clearly unusual. Why are they unusual? It's a deliberate choice to make them strange, and it's not just because so we can say Strange Kompanjie.
I think it's not at all. I mean, some of the labels like Tea Leaf and Wandering Beast effectively sort of predate the name of this project at the least, and there is a bit of post-rationalization going on here, if we're honest. But for example, Wandering Beast looks the way it does because originally it was a Syrah from the Roundstone vineyard in Riebeck-Rivière, which is a very bony, skinny kind of Syrah. There also happened to be Anguni cows, about 6 or 7 of them, that roamed around very close to the vineyard, sometimes eating the fruit. And because the wine itself was a skinny, bony, schist-driven style of Syrah, we felt that an Anguni cow that's indigenous to Southern Africa was more relevant to this. And it's kind of like its bony structure and its heft was sort of truer to this Shiraz, if you like, than a big kind of Aberdeen, Angus, or Hereford might be. So we used that idea of a wandering cow, but an Anguni cow specifically, to try and describe the wine and also some of the truth behind the vineyard. In the tea leaf, for example, we're trying to tell a story here. So tea leaf is most of the fruit these days is still 85% from Pekingese Kloof. So Pekingese Kloof is essentially planted with a few old bush vine grape varieties, and is one of the two kind of key areas for growing rooibos or tea, the red bush tea, which can't be grown in other parts of South Africa, let alone in the United States, which is something that I think is a wonderful thing, that it will only survive as an indigenous fynbos plant there. So where it grows in and amongst the vineyards that we work with, it has an intrinsic value. So the tea leaf represents the story of those individual vineyards. Similarly with just the underworld, Sam, let's say
we've got the wrong one. Well, a different
one.
One.
The red one will do. So with this particular label, it's all about, so the underworld, for example, these are dry grown vineyards. So the root systems have to, the plant above is entirely reliant on the root system below in order to find sustenance in the soil and the water table. And as it does that, it finds typicity of place. If the only thing that you can kind of drink is that's immediately below you, you're going to express something in that place. So the underworld is a celebration of dry-grown vineyards in the coastal region, because they essentially, and they can't help but do anything other than express that place. So really, in all the wines that were, all the reds are carbonically macerated. I mean that in a true kind of gravitational sense of the word. There's no pressure here. They collapse under their own weight. They're not crushed to that extent. They're sort of gently pressed to get a greater expression of varietal and a sense of place. So there's less winemaking involved. All the wines are naturally fermented, generally aged in old oak, if any at all. And we tend to work with unirrigated old bush vines where we can, and also where relevant, if a vine is more than 35 years old, we can apply to have old vine project registration for that vineyard. So we're trying to talk about a sustainable way of
this is the old vine bit here, isn't it, Robin? Oh, I'll have to use this drawing function here.
Yeah, so that's tea leaf, the oldest tea leaf block. So 85% of tea leaf is from vines that are 35 years old, and the biggest proportion of the wine is from a vineyard of bush vine Chenin in Picaniscley, planted in 1962, which by my math is quite a long time ago. So, and I just think it's really interesting that as the vines decrease in yield, as they grow in age and they become more gnarly and they naturally decrease in yield, all of these grape varieties are hand harvested naturally, because most of them are also bush vine. So as the yield decreases, so you get a more kind of natural pH, more longevity. Natural ferments, as we know, tend to give wines more flavour compounds. So your wines have more longevity in the bottle, more interest in the glass, if you like, and they age in a more interesting way. So if it's Palomino that was young vine Palomino grown in Worcester at 30 tonnes a hectare, 40 tonnes a hectare, whatever it might be a neutral grape variety. But when you forget about it and it becomes old and it becomes low yielding, suddenly your Palomino starts to have a voice. And it starts to express that salty soil from where it grows. And that to us is of real interest. Why wouldn't you want to express that? And I think that it is a very subjective process and a subjective project for that. But I think South Africa is full of these fantastic, amazing old vine cultivars, and there must be 20, 30 different varieties that we've yet to go at, which is where our kind of unlimited bit comes from.
We'll get onto that in a second, but just on as a summary of the visuals thing, we sort of digressed a little there. Which isn't unusual. On the summary of the visuals thing, would it be fair to say, and I'm expecting you to say yes, because that's what we've put in our notes, that you've talked a lot about giving a voice to these vineyards, and the importance of that for the Strange Company and for the project, blah 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 blah. That this sort of slightly louder expression visually on the bottle, be it weird, wonderful, or downright terrible, is just there to sort of amplify that voice even more. People don't need these things. People definitely aren't looking for them, and so a label like the one we've got there, people might go, "God, that's terrible," but at least they've noticed it. Or they might say,
if somebody picks this up off a shelf, going, that's a terrible label, and picks it up, then hopefully whoever from Boutinot hand sold that wine to one of our glorious customers, who then could step in at that moment and help and say, it is a terrible label, but actually inside the bottle is this. And we're joking here to make a point. So this particular wine is called Wonder Horse Palomino because Champion the Wonder Horse, I believe, was a Palomino horse, which is a particularly tawdry 1950s, 60s American TV program. And we've borrowed the whole kind of phrasing around Palomino to try and tell a story. I'm sure there's a more subtle, more elegant, a much cleverer way of presenting these things. But I think partly by trying to differentiate these vineyards to give them a voice against more conventionally labelled wines, probably sometimes we go too far, and that's fine. But I think that somehow, in order to be able to talk about these wines at all, we want to give them a slightly louder voice. And then in giving them this Strange Kompanjie gong, which is the duck with the hammer head. Thank you, Sam. We don't know what that is, by the way, but it's across all of the wines, and at least gives us a red thread to say this is a range of wines from relatively unusual vineyards or relatively unusual grape varieties, or wines that are made in a particular way. And we have a lot of fun with the project, and not all of the wines are really that unusual. They're not necessarily that unusual in the glass, but I think to be able to give a voice to things like Fernand Perez. So we've been working with this individual block now for, I think, 8 years, and it's only in the last 3 years that we've bottled it on its own. And we now need all of it. And I think that's fantastic for this vineyard. So in 2022, this vineyard will be 35 years old, and therefore it will have its old vine project gone. That won't make the wine any more lovable, but it sort of shows it helped this vineyard limp towards a point where it gets a kind of a bit more recognition. And I just think that's a really exciting thing to be able to do for sustainable vineyards in South Africa.
So on to very, very quickly, I mean, I don't know how much time we've got. I think we might be slightly running out, but so let's try and be brief on this next point. On the future of Strange Kompanjie, other than continue to give voice to these vineyards and hopefully work with as many of the ones we're working with now for as long as we can, is there anything else that sort of the future holds for Strange Kompanjie, or do you want to talk about the unlimited element of it?
I think it's that the interesting thing about South Africa is it's a drought climate. So those isohydric grape varieties that seem to belong in South Africa's, particularly coastal region, Boutinot, Kloof, as we have seen over the last 10 years, South Africa can have terrible droughts. People queuing up for buckets of water in Cape Town. You know, this is a real thing. It's a real problem. And South Africa, you know, has this incredibly diverse climate of a cold Atlantic next to a very warm continental shelf. So you can make grapes there easily. The great thing about it is that it supports vines of age, and it has this incredible soil structure there as well. That means you can, and then with the climate, that you can grow grapes of interest. And given enough time, and South Africa has had 362 years of vintages, there are amazing pockets of vineyards out there yet to be discovered. We are by no means the only people doing this. I'm incredibly happy to say, of course, and there are some awesome winemakers out there whose projects for these things are far better known than ours. I think we're lucky at Boutinot that we have a strong platform for more conventional South African wines that give us a voice, a platform that we've built to have a voice to talk about these things. So I would look at, we're looking at 2021 Claret Blanche now from an old vineyard, and we're looking at a particular way with Cinsault. We're looking at Touriga Nacional and Tinta Barocca and other things that might be. What should be planted in South Africa, as we know, is probably Greek islands, grape varieties, Assyrtiko and whatnot, that the world definitely doesn't need. But there's a balance between grubbing up what the world doesn't need and then giving it a voice before that happens, or maintaining that and giving it a voice so that sustainable vineyards are maintained in South Africa and have a voice. So we see Grenache Blanc being planted in South Africa a lot in the last 5 years because it grows like a weed there when it's given the right opportunity. Whereas try planting Sauvignon Blanc in the same place and it will fail because it needs water. Merlot, it needs water. That doesn't make those grape varieties irrelevant, because a huge volume of South Africa's wine business is based on relatively well-known grape varieties. But the fact that Grenache Blanc seems to grow there happily, or Mourvèdre, albeit it takes a very long time, 20 years to make that red wine you want potentially, it's a hugely exciting region for some of those Mediterranean and Rhone and, dare I say, Greek island grape varieties. That's the future of Strange Kompanjie, I think, is talking about this subject all the time. It's not about volume, it's not about scale. As we know, Sam, putting something into bottle and presenting it to some really big customers out there that then take it on. Is a huge success for Strange Kompanjie, but in its own labels and in its own project, it's about talking about them primarily rather than volume itself.
Robin, we've got a question from our friends on the Emerald Isle of Ireland. Does Strange Kompanjie allow you the freedom to explore, and that influences your other South African winemaking? So I guess the question is, does what we do with Strange Kompanjie allow us, and the exploration we're allowed to do on that small scale, allow us with, whether be it Wilderberg or Boutinot South Africa more widely, does it allow us to experiment on a small scale that then influences what we do on a larger scale, perhaps? Or
I mean, Boutinot deals with some big customers as well. I'm not going to name them here, but there's some quite large supermarkets in the UK and in other markets that we work with, and some of those people have been brave enough to take on some of these cultivars. Even in the last week or so, and certainly in the last 18 months, where we presented these wines to say there's an exciting thing here to be had, and the wines that have ultimately gone into those are something of volume, which is, it might be done with their own label or whatever it might be. But I think by giving those vineyards a voice and by presenting them at all in a way that is probably more acceptable than this label, for example, is good for the vineyards, if not necessarily Strange Kompanjie's specific brand, but that doesn't matter. We're able to present the wines and give them a three-dimensional option of what this wine looks like in a bottle, and then they will do something with it themselves with our work. That's been a hugely exciting part of the last 2 years of the Strange Kompanjie. It's a lot of these wines have and the vineyards have been worked with, and the wines that we've produced from here have been taken on because we've given them a voice, albeit not necessarily under our label. I think that's a good thing. So yes, it allows us to experiment all the time. It gives us a vehicle to do that with by setting up a virtual lab, albeit using somebody else's facilities, usually Wilderberg's, to do so. We have complete liberty we've set up a thing called Strange Kompanjie Unlimited. All of that says it's going to be slightly odd, and that allows us great liberty to experiment. And by doing that, we can express lots of things that are happening in South Africa, different ways of winemaking, and things that we should be planting, unplanted mountains that we want to look at, quite apart from working with other vines as well.
We have, we've covered an awful lot in the last 37 minutes. If there are people watching, which hopefully they're still there watching by now, if they are there still watching, and they're thinking, yes, this definitely sounds like my kind of thing, or what on earth have I been, what have I watched for the last 37 minutes? I'm not quite sure why I'm still here. It doesn't seem relevant at all to anything to do with me. But both are valid opinions. What we've talked in the past about having to have maybe the right customer or the right set of customers in your shop or in your business that you're selling in. 34 in the audience, Felix tells me. Wow. Unfortunately, we started out with 64. So we've talked in the past about having to have the right customer or the right set of customers that come into your shop or into your business, restaurant, whatever it is, in order to sort of make these wines work. Have you got we've put like a word of warning type thing for where does this fit into the portfolio of our customers, perhaps?
I think if anybody has got an open mind about wine at all, whether it's natural wine, orange wine, unusual cultivars, or just an open mind about trying to find something interesting and potentially different, or something that they didn't know was there already, then I think the Strange Kompanjie is relevant to that thought process, to that open mind. If the same project could be applied to Portugal, or you see some of this being applied to bits of Central Australia, or if only New Zealand planted something else. That kind of, I think that it's relevant to somebody with an open mind in terms of what could be. And I think to look at different expressions of different varieties from what's a known region. I don't think you can judge South Africa by its Sauvignon Blanc and Merlot alone, and increasingly, fortunately, it's being judged by its Chenin Blanc, its Cinsault, and other things. But look more widely than that, and I think explore what's also out there. There are 330 grape varieties indigenous to Portugal alone, and we're talking about one of them here, planted in South Africa, that probably is getting, more talked about at the moment than Fernão Perez in Portugal. I just think we just need an open mind. South Africa is absolutely full of these amazing old vineyards that we should be talking about. They're sustainable, they're interesting, they taste different. For us, it's useful because it's incredibly lazy winemaking. We do very little here. It's naturally fermented, effectively unfiltered and bottled, and we don't even make that much of it. And we show it to people, and if they like them, they buy it. And when we run out, we make them again. I think it's not a particularly hard process for us, because there are lots of interesting grape varieties out there. What we beg really of our customers more than anything is an open mind to try them and to give them a chance.
So I think we've covered everything almost there, Robin. Probably time to wrap up. Would you say? Have you got any final parts?
It's 4 o'clock in this country now, son. So
you've gone for it. 20 to 5, even better. But thank you very much, everybody who's been watching. I believe all of these wines are available to Boutinot International customers. Is that correct, Robin?
Absolutely.
All we talked about and the Strange Kompanjie portfolio. If you are interested in them, or a tasting, or finding out more, please do get in contact with your Boutinot representative. Or Robin,
and check out its very haphazard Instagram page.
Yeah, I was going to say, how can people find them on Instagram?
Strange Kompanjie, at Strange Kompanjie.
At Strange Kompanjie, the way that it's spelled up at the top, the name of this presentation, and you'll find Robin's haphazard attempt at an Instagram account for it. But it's wonderful, and as weird as he is, and the wine is too. Next up, we've got War of the Roses, which is a pun on rosé wine, which I think is brilliant. So stick around for that if you're interested in that, with a few of our winemakers and some of our Boutinot International friends. And that's it from us, I think. It's time to do the newsreel.